Okay, well this is a video, this is the video summary. What happened here was I got myself a Chevy pickup truck as a hobby. It developed a problem where the starter wouldn't stop cranking. So you turn the key and the only way you could get it to stop would be to disconnect the battery. The problem went for about a year. I tried all sorts of different wiring, connecting, disconnecting wires. I changed out the key tumbler. So where you put in the key in these 1970 General Motors Chevy trucks, it doesn't have any electrical connection or circuitry, but it connects and it's like a tumbler, and it pushes a push rod down to the starter switch. So I get straight to the point. The problem was fixed by wiring in a remote starter. Solenoid. It's a Ford product. That's it there. That's the information. Since wiring in the remote starter, things have been going perfectly. So that's the fix. This is a long video. It's a bit of like a study on the subject of starter run-ons. By putting this up, I'm trying to get a bit of feedback and discussion on the subject. I'm guessing the possibility that the problem could be where the generator or alternator is wired up, where it comes in and it connects to the starter. So the alternator could be producing too much current, and that could be keeping the starter running. Another possibility could be that there's an unknown switch or connection between the carburetor and distributor. So at one stage I showed that when I pump the accelerator it will disengage the starter. Just in general, that the carburetor is connected to the distributor via a type of vacuum sensor, so that could be in a way affecting the starter motor run-on. If you've got this problem with a similar vehicle, one test that might be worthwhile doing is disconnecting the alternator lead where it joins onto the starter motor and connecting it up to the battery and just bypassing the starter motor, and that would, if the generator's keeping the starter motor on with its current, then you'd know whether that's the problem or not. With this video I do go down a few wrong tracks as I'm trying to diagnose what the problem is. So it's a lengthy video, but it's a kind of a study into this subject of starter motor run-on. Good luck, and I hope you enjoy the video, and please like and subscribe. This is the solenoid. I showed you blocks in this introductory part of the video. So that's the battery cable coming from the battery. That's the starter motor cable going to the starter motor. This side also has a separate wire for the starter motor solenoid to activate the solenoid. And I'll leave you to view the rest of the video. So we're now going to the start of the actual video in the next clip. One last thing, this cable here is the cable from your key inside your cab to activate the starter solenoid. Okay, here we've got a Chevy C20. What's happening is when I turn the key, the starter motor keeps on cranking and it won't stop, even though I put the ignition key back to the normal position. I took the starter motor off, and when I reattached the starter motor I turned the key, and it did stop the starter motor from turning a few times. However, after cleaning the contact points, the ground points to the engine between the starter motor and the engine, as I said, it did work properly. It stopped turning, but the third time I tried to turn the the ignition switch to the crank position, it kept on cranking when I released it. So that's a type of clue. I think it could be a bad ground. So before installing a new ignition switch, I'm just going to look into the ground situation. So with the ground situation, when I bought the truck, I've got a positive, oh that's the positive lead, beg your pardon. So there's the negative lead. That went from the negative on the battery to the bracket holding the alternator or the generator, and that's it. That's the ground system off the battery. So the next thing that I'd like to do is put another lead, a negative lead from the battery to the frame down there, and from the engine to the frame, and see if that fixes it. Okay, what I'll try and do is demonstrate the problem. So when I turn the key, it should keep on cranking. So I'll turn the key now. Okay, so it was good that time. So we'll try again. Okay, well that's good. Third time. Okay. Okay, I'll try and demonstrate that the engine will just keep on, or the starter motor will just keep on cranking over. So there's the key there. So there we go. Okay, so that's the situation. It had been doing that constantly for quite a while I've been doing some work on the car. However, the previous video showed that it stopped cranking 3 times. So what that says to me is that it's probably not the ignition key. I'd put my money on it being a bad ground. It's a lot of work to replace the ignition switch. You have to undo all of this, and you need 2 special tools to get the steering wheel off. And there's also like a spring trap mechanism on the inside that has to be released, and a small round washer has to be prized out to expose the ignition switch. But the ignition switch doesn't actually have any terminals or wires running to it. What that activates is like a type of mechanism that's turned inside, just inside there. So I'd say the ignition switch is good. Okay, so to demonstrate more clearly what I mean there, that's an ignition switch, and you may be able to see in the end there that there's no electrical wires running to the switch anywhere, and that end there just slots onto a sort of a shaft inside the steering column, and just turns the steering column mechanism. So I think the keys, the ignition switch is good, the steering column's good. I think this truck only needs proper grounding, and it should be okay. Something else that could be happening is the drive gear on the starter motor could be sticking on the flywheel. That's a possibility, but I'd say that if it's properly grounded, then it should fix the problem. Last time I took the starter motor off, I remember that one of the connections, I think it was a ground or something, was nearly touching a positive. So I'm going to remove the starter motor now, and I'll go through a test for the starter motor, and just put a bit of insulation on that wire. Okay, so we're under the truck now, and there's the starter motor. May be able to see up there the joint or the wiring. Not sure if I can get that to show. Yeah, just there. But one of those wires is almost touching another contact point. Yeah, so that's the starter motor. So I'll take that off now and see about putting some insulation on one of those wires there. Yeah, this is the awesome thing about having a truck. You've got stacks and stacks of room underneath. Might be able to see the clearance there. Okay, we'll get that starter motor off. It's fairly heavy, but there's only 2 bolts, one there, one behind. And remove some of the wiring and she'll come off. Okay, there's the wiring there. So we've got the big black cable is a positive from the battery. We've got another positive running to the same terminal. And that negative cable there, now you can see what I mean when I say that I have to insulate that cable there. That's almost touching. That's a positive flow cable there, and it's very nearly touching. Okay, so I'll remove the wiring and get that done. Okay, so as you can see, unfortunately it is red, but what I'll do is I'll colour that black before I connect it up. So I managed to get some shrink wrap on that, and I've got a candle lighter and put the flame to it, and it's shrunk back very well. Okay, so now we see we've got a ground wire that's properly insulated, and I've also got a ground wire running from the starter. So it's got the thickest cable I could find. If there's any problems with that, I'll let you know. But the more ground wires you've got, the better. So I'll put the starter motor back on the engine. I've also greased up the flywheel. So that's, you can see there, there's got grease going around, probably more than half of it. So just in case the starter's sticking on the flywheel. I'd just like to add that another possible cause of the starter motor sticking or not turning off is a bad ground. That's the mating surface there to the engine, and this engine doesn't have a engine to chassis or chassis to battery ground cable. So that's the starter motor there, that's the mating surface, and it's fairly grubby and dirty, and that's the mating surface up there that it sticks to. That's not too bad because I cleaned that, but I didn't clean the starter motor, so I'll get onto that now. Okay, so that's a bit better. That's the mating surfaces there. They're cleaned up, so it's ready to be reinstalled. Okay, so the starter motor's connected up. The mating surface is clean. I haven't hooked up that ground wire that I put on the back of the starter, but we'll turn the key over and we'll see what we've got. Okay, so if it doesn't work this time, then obviously it's down to the bad ground wires. So we'll see if that work has fixed it. Okay, so the next plan of action is to put a ground lead from the battery down to the frame. So from the frame I'll go to the engine, and I'll also hook up this this ground lead from the starter motor to the same point down on the chassis, and I'll probably run a wire to the cab as well. So once that work's done, then we'll turn the key, see what we got, and if that doesn't fix it, then we'll be looking at installing that new ignition switch. Okay, stay tuned. Oh, by the way, probably noticed that that's an oversized battery. I put a big 4x4 marine battery in, installed it on the truck. That's not the problem. I tried starting it with a small jump starter, and made no difference, so that's not part of the problem. As I've said before, I have had the starter motor off. I've tested the starter motor and the solenoid is good, so when the starter motor is off the car and it's hooked up to a battery external from the car, it all tests fine, and the solenoid's good, yeah. Okay, it's the 19th, following weekend. I didn't have my list with me, and what I should have done is tested the starter motor while it was off the car. So I'll be doing this, that this morning. Just like to say that I'm not a mechanic, I'm not an auto electrician, but I hope to be able to find out what the problem is. I've got a list of work that I'd like to go through. I've also got the ground lead I need to do a ground lead, put a ground lead system on the car. So I'll be working through this today, just randomly, and maybe I'll pick up on the problem. I thought what I'd do is take a different approach and maybe get in the cab, turn the key, and just try and make the starter motor stop just by sort of turning the key off and on. Okay, so let's take the starter motor off and test it then. Okay, I have to interrupt this program to let everyone know some breaking news. I've disconnected the starter and it's working perfectly. Not only that, also the fans stop working when the ignition's off, so I'll turn it on and we can hear the starter start and stop. Not only that, but you'll hear the fan shut off completely when I turn the ignition off. So that's it. All it is just a grounding problem. Okay, I'll just go and turn the key. I'll just add at this point that when I tested the starter motor, then I had it secured to this crate with a tie down, and I backed it up with some bricks against the crate, because when they spin they could jump off and you could damage the starter motor. Okay, the latest is with the starter motor connected and this ground lead running from the starter motor connected to the battery, it still keeps cranking over, so I might try grounding the engine to the frame. Okay, now for an update. So what I've done is get the light out. You might be able to see down there I've run a cable from the block. Just point that out now. That's that one. Goes from the engine block, comes around and joins up at the junction here. I've got a cable running from the frame up to the battery. I've got a cable running from the original cable running from the generator or alternator, and that's the same, that runs to the battery. I've got a small wire running from the frame down to the starter motor, and I've got this test wire running up to the cab, and I've still got the same problem. So it's not a grounding issue. I think it seems to have something to do with the starter motor being on the engine. If it was insulated and not touching the engine in any way, I think it might fix the problem. So what I'll do is I'll take the starter motor off tomorrow, and I'll put some insulation tape on the mating surface and a bit of insulation around the bolt, and just see if that helps. So that's the next move, so stay tuned. I also tested starting it with this small battery, small jump starter, and it made absolutely no difference. Once the engine started to crank, it kept on cranking. Okay, it's the 26th of the 8th, 2017. This weekend I'm just going to do two simple tests. I'm going to find the wire that goes to the starter motor solenoid, and I'm going to turn the key on and see if there's voltage supplied to the solenoid, and when I turn the key off, there should be none. That would mean that the ignition switch on its second test would be proven to be good. If the ignition switch is good, I'm going to take the starter motor off and inspect the solenoid. Okay, so it's 1:30 and I've just managed to find some precious time, so I'll make a start on it now. Okay, so I've got the power from the battery supplied to the car, just there, and I'm hooked up to that should be the signal wire to activate the solenoid. Okay, I've just got to get that in focus, the light. Okay, turn the key on. There's 12 volts. Turn the key off. Okay, this is a starter motor test for a Chevy C20 running a 454. So, got the information there. Won't focus. Okay, so first of all, we're going to I'll test the starter motor first. So I've got a battery. I've made doubly sure that the terminals are hooked up the right way. So the ground goes to ground there, or you could hook it onto the body. I've got the power going to the where the battery cable connects up. So I'm just going to bridge where the battery cable connects up to the starter motor, and this point here connecting to the starter motor. So we'll see the starter motor works. Now I'll test the solenoid. So this post here, that's where the voltage is supplied to, and the solenoid activates the starter motor. So okay, this test won't show up any problems at the starter motor when it's working under load, when it's actually turning the motor. I've got a problem with my vehicle, with my truck, and the problem is that the starter motor won't stop cranking. But that's how you test your starter motor. Just like to add that I'm wearing eye protection, and just disconnect the negative or black cable first. You can see the negative sign there, maybe. That's it there, and that's positive. Just remove the negative cable first always. And also, when you do the test between the solenoid and the starter motor, make sure you use a well insulated good rubber handle like that. Okay, what I'll do is just take apart the solenoid and see how it looks inside. So there's a few bolts holding the solenoid onto the starter motor body, and there'll also be this for the voltage to go through this small bolt there. Yeah, the solenoid seems to be good. When you look up in there, there's nothing burnt out. All the contact points seem pretty good. So it all seems fairly new. While I was filming before, this key here seemed to fall out, but I'm pretty sure it was in place. Just point out that this has got an R next to it, and this has got an S next to it. Okay, unfortunately this bolt here, you can see that the small nut has broken off inside it, and it doesn't matter which way I twist the nut, I can't get it out. That's the other side of it, and that comes through that hole there and connects to the starter motor there. Okay, so sometimes those little things you get just in case pay off. These are, I think they're called circlips, and there was a groove in this pin that fell out, so I've just put a very small circlip around that to hold it in place. I don't know if it's a problem or not. I'm just thinking if it slowly slipped out, it might fall out of one hole on the mechanism and not the other and jam up. I'm not sure yet, but I'll get another solenoid and continue on another day. Okay, so there it is. So that's the packet. That will be the model number. Comes with the spring. The spring's compressed, and there the nuts, bolts, and the spacers. Okay, that's it there, and that's the price and postage. I'm thinking if it does turn out to be the solenoid, it could be as something as simple as the spring. I did get the spring and I stretched it out. It was shorter than that, so we'll see how that compares with the new one. Okay, well the new one, that's there. It's not that much shorter. That's a stock standard size, so I don't think it was a spring. So the spring's on. Okay, so just for clarification, that's the pin there that did fall out. So I'll just demonstrate. Might be able to see that moves there. And I'll put that clip in the bottom just to keep it there. Okay, so the solenoid's held on by two small nuts, one there and there. They're done up. And here I'll put the spacer and tighten up the small nut, connecting the solenoid to the starter. Okay, so I'll throw that on the motor and we'll see what we get. Okay, so the electrical wiring is now attached. And we can hear that it works. Okay, unfortunately that's not the fix. Okay, so I'll crank it over. Okay, so it's looking more and more like it being the ignition key. The reason I haven't replaced the ignition key is when I tested the starter motor off the car, it seemed to work fine. But that's the next plan. Okay, during the week I've been thinking. What happened was it came with a set of keys, and I always keep a set of spare keys. So just thinking it could be the a worn key because I've been using the original key. Okay, so let's try the spare key. One clue that it's the ignition key. It could be the fact that it doesn't come out all that easily. See, I can't get it out there. That's for the off position. Okay. Yeah, so that's the spare key. I had that cut about probably about 3 months ago. Alright, well here goes. Let's see. Okay, it was worth a try. So you try and keep trying and eventually you get it fixed, right? So just waiting for parts to come and I'll change out the ignition switch. Okay, replacing the ignition switch on a Chevy C20 from 1977. Okay, I've taken off the horn. I've removed this cylinder here. Then this was removed and the horn button. So there's a steering wheel. These are the tools I've purchased. And that's the ignition switch. That's a 1977 ignition switch. I think the later ones had a notch running through this area here, and that was for a screw to go through and to lock it in. I think this has got a spring mechanism. That's the steering wheel puller. Not bad value actually. $22.44. For where I live, that's fairly good. That's the lock plate removal tool. I pay a fair amount more here. So that's the prices. Okay, here's the ignition switch. I hope that's focusing. Okay, I'll remove that clip and undo the bolt. You'll need eye protection for getting that off, in case it springs and hits you. Okay, just remove the cables from your battery so there's no current running through the car electrical system. Okay, a 7/8 socket, and it was on only very loosely. Didn't take much to undo it. That's the second part to be removed, and it's a bit rusty, so I'm going to give that a bit of a spray paint. An interesting plastic washer, eh? Just to keep everything in place. Okay, I've got a marking pen, and I'm going to mark the top and the outside, so I know which direction everything goes back together. When you get your steering wheel puller, make sure it comes with imperial bolts, not just metric, because this won't be metric, so just bear that in mind. Okay, after a fair bit of looking into this, it turns out that this is metric, metric 8, so 8mm metric threads or bolts. Yeah, so that's the correct thread, and you can see there that's a coarse thread, so UNC thread. This truck was made in California in 1977, but that's definitely, as you can see there, that's going all the way in. That's the correct thread. So apparently that's metric. When you're putting the bolts in, you'll see here that on the outside here there's a metal part that goes around there. With this steering wheel, this metal part is actually sitting out over the hole here. So when I tried to get this in, it appeared that it was the wrong size. Whereas here it just threaded in easily. So that's something to bear in mind. Okay, I've got the steering wheel puller partially on the steering wheel, and just going to put this piece in underneath there. Okay, I've actually turned this around so that it sits closer to the steering wheel. These two bolts are fully seated in the thread, and that part underneath is lined up with this tightening bolt. So I'll see what I get. Okay, I've also put a bit of WD-40 down here between the shaft and the steering wheel. Again, I'll mark the top and outside. Okay, next is this cover here. What I did was I got some pliers and just went and clipped around these holes here, and with the pliers I just prised it up. I found that using a screwdriver to try and prise it off from underneath didn't work because that plate's underneath. Okay, so that's the ring down in there that has to be removed. So this has to be compressed down. That ring has to be prised out, and then this plate can come off. Okay, so this is interchangeable, the end between metric and imperial. So there's a little pin, you disconnect it and you swap it around to get the right thread. But this thread's onto this thread here, and you can tighten it down. Okay, so tighten it down with the handle, and then you've got this wing nut here, and you tighten that down to compress this. Okay, that's the little retaining clip you got to get out, and I think I'll have success with this. So that's how it works. It just spreads it out, and as you can probably see, this is a fairly new phone, but it won't focus all that well, but you can see that I can spread that apart and I should be able to work it up and over. Okay, so I'm now able to just work that clip sort of up. You can see there on the other side. Okay, so now the clip's just resting there, and I should be able to just undo this and remove that cover plate. But just keep hold of the handle and undo the wing nut, otherwise it could spring off and hit you in the face. Okay, I have to remove that clip. I see this has got a wire going through. You might be able to just see it there, and because this has got, or it had cruise control, so it'll just have to rest like that. That's the hazard lights. Unfortunately, when they put this one on, they cracked the plastic there when they screwed it in. Okay, there's 3 screws to undo. So if I kick this down, I saw it in another video, then got 1, 2, 3. Okay, that's down in behind that assembly there. That silver bit is the back of the lock, and there's a little stripe in front of it just below the screw hole there, and I've got to break that flashing off. Okay, so that there is the back of the lock, and that's the flashing there that I've got to remove. Okay, you might be able to see it there, that little bit of flashing broke off, and that's now exposing the lock and that sort of trapdoor I've got to push down. Okay, so that little ridge sticking up there, that's part of the lock, and I'll break that off. Oh, beg your pardon, I'll press it down now and the lock should come out. Okay, so there's the original lock. I know that because the flashing wasn't broken off. That's the part, like the lock-in mechanism there, that I had to press down to release it. It was tight. I did have to get that flashing piece off because you have to put the screwdriver in on an angle and just sort of work it out. So the problem is that it won't stop cranking. So when I go to start the engine, the starter motor keeps on cranking over. I noticed that the end of it's fairly worn there. Yeah, that's actually 40 years old, so that could be my problem. Okay, there's the new one there, and see the end of it. So this camera's not focusing as well as I thought it would. Okay, there's the information on the new lock. Okay, lock installation. The best way that I can describe it is the key's turned anti-clockwise, like to the off position, and there's a little notch here. I'll be able to see it there, and that will line up with the this arrow on the column. All right, so first try. Alright, this might be some better advice. So you've got the end of it, and that's shaped sort of like long ways. What you need to do is try and line that up with the pin that it's got to slot into. So just trying to get some light on that. Okay, so you might just be able to see it there, that pin just below the light there. That's also shaped long ways, and just try and match them up. Okay, so it's now installed. That's the back of the lock there. So yeah, I just lined it up with the pin that slots into the back of the ignition switch. Okay, the ignition switch seems better. It's returning back to where that notch is lining up with this arrow, and it seems good. I don't know whether I've mentioned it yet or in this clip, but before you install a new ignition switch, remove the cables from your battery. Okay, we'll see if that fixed a cranking starter motor problem. Okay, so far, in summary, I've got a starter motor that won't stop cranking. The solenoid on the starter motor has been replaced, so that's new. The ignition switch has now been replaced, and that hasn't made any difference either. So it's now I'm thinking it's got something to do with the starter motor teeth engaging on the flywheel. Okay, so the next move is to take the starter motor off and inspect the pinion gear, just to make sure that it's not jamming on the flywheel. Okay, so when reassembling, the golden rule is to that little bit of the horn that comes out as you're putting on the steering wheel, that has to line up with the hole on the steering wheel. Otherwise, you know, you'll crack it. Okay, so I just want to point out that this is your horn assembly, and that goes through the steering wheel. As you're putting on the steering wheel, just make sure that this all lines up nicely with the hole provided in the steering wheel. Number everything as you take everything off, and have a paint mark on the top and on the outside of the housing, just so that when you put it back together, everything lines up. Also, when you're testing your indicator and horn, make sure you reconnect your battery to the car electrical system. Also, with the horn, just make sure that it's all assembled, so that that metal bit and the lock-in mechanism, it's all together before you put the steering wheel on. Okay, I'll wrap the ignition switch part of this video up. Again, just make sure you've got plenty of time up your sleeve. Label everything 1, 2, 3, etc. as it comes off, and use a paint pen like this just to mark the top and outside so that you can line everything up as it goes together. Okay, we've got a Chevy C20 made in 1977 in California. The problem is that the starter motor keeps on cranking, so you'll turn the key and then you'll release it and the starter motor will keep on cranking. At this point I had to put a new solenoid on it, because when I went to inspect the solenoid, the copper and the metal bolt had welded together between the solenoid and the starter, so the small bolt broke off inside the solenoid, the copper part, so I had to get a new solenoid. Also, it's got a new ignition switch, and now we're going to look at the tolerance between the throwout gear on the starter motor and the flywheel. So that is to say that I think at this point that the pinion gear on the starter motor could be jamming on the flywheel. Okay, so I'll take the starter motor off and just inspect that that pinion gear. Okay, so I'm taking the starter motor off. I was going to put some washers as a type of shim system in between the starter motor and the motor mount plate just there, just as a type of you know, just to make sure that the pinion gear wasn't mashing up against and jamming against the flywheel there. And I've got the starter motor off, and I was going to reroute the wires there, and I noticed that there's an exposed wire just there, and directly underneath it it's the same. So I'll just demonstrate that now. So at the end underneath where I've put the cover there, you can see that exposed wire there on top, and underneath it's the same. That's also exposed wire. So I'll peel that back now. I'll get the wrap off this and have a closer look. Okay, so just to demonstrate, that's peeled back a bit, and there's definitely a break or a join there, and there's the other one. Okay, I'll just demonstrate that the starter does work off the vehicle still. Okay, this will be uploaded as a video summary. So what we've got here is a 1977 Chevy C20 with a 454, and what the problem was it wouldn't stop cranking. So I'd turn the key to the crank position to turn the engine over, and then I'd release the ignition switch, and the engine would continue to crank over. At this point, the ignition switch has been replaced, and the solenoid on the starter. Okay, so now I'll show you what I've found and what the problem could be. Okay, so there's the solenoid. There's a starter behind it. Okay, as we can see, the wiring's in very bad shape. There's exposed wires. There's multiple joins. Okay, starting with the solenoid wire. That's the wire furthest away. We've got a crack or a join just about here where the wire shows through the insulation. It's a fairly heavy gauge black wire. It then has a join, and then it turns into a red wire, and then another join, and we see the original brown wire, and up around about there's exposed wire showing through the outside lining. Okay, now the wire closest to us, that's it comes off the solenoid. So that's from the battery. It comes off the solenoid, and it's a power supply to the cab and motor. I think it's the power supply to everything. Looks now like a red wire. Then we've got a join. Then it turns into a thin black wire. It travels up, and there's another join up there before it joins into, I think, a red wire. Just like to point out that these wires are oil soaked, and that the wiring harness that these wires were in, it actually had a join in the harness as well. Okay, so the battery cable, the one closest to us, that is that's the thick red cable coming from the cab. So that comes down, and that's the battery cable. The other one's the power supply to trigger the solenoid, and that joins up, I think, the top one there. So that's the brown cable. So that's that one there, and it's also got a exposed wire up the top there. So they're the original cables up the top there, and we're looking up at the firewall, and you know, that's a pretty nifty piece of work if you ask me. If you're looking at this video and you've got a similar problem, what I'd recommend is at night, come down when it's completely dark, make sure the vehicle won't move, you know, chock the wheels, like, you know, for instance like that, and make sure it's in neutral, make doubly sure it won't move, and just look for any sparks or any current jumping from wire to wire. Okay, so the final story, the power supply to the solenoid. So we've got a join there, and it seems to have a bit of solder on it, that one. But the next one up is just twisted wire, and that's a thinner gauge of wire, the red wire. And yeah, then it runs up, and I'll be able to show you. There's a part there of exposed wire, and it was all oil soaked, and the joins are also oil soaked. While it's in focus, I'll do the next one. It's a battery supply cable, or the interior cab electrical supply. So I'll just get that wire up there, and that's just twisted around, just joined. I'd like it to focus, but okay. So yeah, then that runs into a thin gauge wire, and it runs up, and there's a joint up there. That's also twisted around, the wire's just twisted around. So yeah, not the best. Okay, so if you're watching this video, then that's the reason for a starter motor continuing to crank the motor once the ignition switch is released. Okay, so now I'll turn you over to the rest of the video, where I'll do the wiring, properly wire it, get the right thickness, the right gauge wire, and we should see that it'll start. So I'll turn you over to the rest of the video now. Okay, so that's the main electrical wire. I've got a new piece of wire here. That's the old piece. I've soldered it and put some shrink wrap on it, and I'm just going to drag it straight through and up. You might be able to see there, that's the solenoid trigger wire, and that's the new wire there. So okay, so that's the other side there. So I'm just going to pull on that and pull the new wire through. Okay, there it is. So that's the new cable, and that's the join there. It did snag, so I just threaded it back through and had another go. You may want to put a second shrink wrap on this, just so that there's no edges. Okay, so what I've got to do now is get these, save this joiner, take it off and put it on here. Oh, you'll need 2 meters of new cable. Okay, so there it is. They're both soldered, and this trigger wire to the solenoid from the ignition switch is soldered, and it's got 2 shrink wraps on it. So they should be good. Okay, this wire here, just be careful not to put too much shrink wrap on it, because it'll go in underneath the power connection there. That's the red wire. That's how the brown wire is connected. It's connected to the the higher part of the solenoid. Okay, just a quick correction. What I'm doing with the power lead, so it's that one there, is I'm routing it in behind, in through here. I find that if I don't, it'll actually touch the exhaust pipe, so it's actually going back through that way. Okay, well, it's the next day, 15th of October 2017, and unfortunately that didn't fix the problem, so the funny thing is, yesterday it worked perfectly, although the motor did run on for about 3 seconds, but then the starter motor stopped. So, but as soon as it started up, then it ran fine. The starter motor disengaged. Okay, so I've got the solenoid wire. Solenoid wire's live, so that's it there, and it's hooked up to the battery, and it's grounded to the starter there, the starter ground. Okay, so it runs along the wiring harness and to this junction box here. And behind it is the fuse box that runs into the cab. Okay, so when I test it, it goes to this connector here. Okay, and that's the copper one there. So it should be the outside one, three down. So that one there. Okay, I didn't really want it to come to this, but I'm going to do it. I'm going to set the motor cranking. I'm going to come around and tap it with a hammer underneath just to see whether or not that fixes the problem. Okay, so this is a test to see if the starter motor's sticking on the flywheel. Okay, well, here goes nothing. Just as I got under there to tap the motor, the starter stopped. Alright, take two. Okay, that made no difference. The next thing I'll do is put the shims or the washers underneath the starter. Okay, so you may be able to see that there's actually two washers there, and I'm going to try putting one of them up in between the engine block and the starter. Okay, so there it is again. that's actually going to focus, because that's good. Looks like AB14L2. Okay, well, the gears look they look good. They don't seem to have been jamming up. The other side is lubricated. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, these are the two washers that came with the bolt, and I'm going to put the bolt through, and that's where it meets up with the engine, and I'm going to put this washer on top, in between the starter and the engine, just to give it more clearance, and we'll see what happens. Okay, that did nothing. I tested the starter and it made no difference. Okay, what I'm going to do now is demonstrate that the starter motor does disengage, but it's when the motor starts. So okay, that's the first time that I've ever done anything to make the starter motor stop when I release the key. Look, all I did was put my foot on the accelerator. Just one thing I'd like to point out is that cable there, that was out. That was off the distributor, so I'll attach that now. Okay, I'll do the same test again. I'll pump the accelerator as I'm turning the key. Okay, so this is what I'm getting. So you have to pump the accelerator, or the starter motor won't stop. There's no electrical wires running to the carburetor. The only thing is a vacuum advance running to the alternator. The engine won't start when this hose is disconnected to the vacuum advance. I can't really think of any real connection between the carburetor and the starter motor. Could be some sort of communication in the distributor. 16th of the 10th, 2017. So I've just got back from getting a pink slip. I was successful. Okay, so I started the car in the morning and I realised I didn't touch the accelerator. Then I started it again near the mechanic's place for the green slip, beg your pardon, the pink slip. And I realised I hadn't touched the accelerator and everything was good. And after the inspection I started it, and again I realised I haven't touched the accelerator. Okay, I want to show that that's the accelerator. There's nothing electrical connected to the accelerator. So the top of the accelerator connects up there. I'm just feeling a cable, so yeah, just up there, that connects to a cable. So connects straight to a cable up there. The cable comes out, and I'm just going to film around the carburetor. What I'm saying here is that there is nothing electrical anywhere on the carburetor. There's only the vacuum advance and there's also nothing behind. The fix, the only thing that I can think of is it could have something to do with the distributor, with connecting or disconnecting the vacuum advance, or pulling out that that brown lead there. It also could have had something to do with tapping on the starter as well. I purchased this truck because of the registration. It was registered for about 10 months when I purchased it. I thought, if I purchase it with that registration, you know, if anything goes wrong, it could get me through, and by the time it's fixed, I could, I'd be able to renew it. I got the pink slip and registered it with 3 days to spare. Okay, you never assume that something's fixed until the next day. It's now the 17th of October 2017. Okay, this is the real test for to see if the starter motor has been fixed. So I'll try 4 times. If it stops cranking 4 times, then it's fixed. Okay, I had to take care of some stuff, and the battery lead, I reconnected the ground. So here's the test. Alright, well, we have to pump the accelerator. We have to pump the accelerator. It's just the way it is. Alright. Okay. Okay, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pump the accelerator once and then try and start it. Okay, pump the accelerator. Just a sec. I'm going to try and start it. This is really weird. Okay, what I'm going to try and do now is just generally start it and pump the accelerator. Okay, that last time was some valuable information. So last time it was in the cranking cycle where the starter motor kept on cranking, but then what stopped the cranking was the ignition firing. So the problem is in the distributor. Okay, next we're going to look at the neutral safety switch for the cause of the cranking problem. It's located down the bottom of the steering column, and I've removed it, and that's it there. It did have these two purple wires running to it. They've been bypassed. I think the previous owner or one of the previous owners may have tried to fix it. That connected just there. Okay, so that's how that connected. It's got a piece of plastic for a stabilizer going into the join there. So I'm going to order another one because that's looks like it's seen better days. So that's the connectors there. What have we got? We got 17C18. Okay, I'll get a new one of them. Okay, so that's the steering column, and it was connected just there in the middle of the video there, but above, so up there. Okay, so this is what I found. I was able to unclip it and undo it. So this just slides around in there, and that sits into a groove. When you move the column shift, it moves this around, and it goes on different contact points. I found that the grease inside had turned to a type of glue or a type of cement. It's actually hard baked on sort of lacquer or coating, and I'd say probably what's happening is the contact points are being a bit compromised. This has a spring. So that's fairly greasy, that part there. But yeah, this just sits in there, makes different contact points, and so that sits in there like so. That shifts around, and there's little clamps. There's a clamp there, there, and there. They clamp over and crimp onto crimp the metal holder part onto the plastic body. Now I'll go and fix it up, go and try and clean it up, and I'll tell you what works best for me. Okay, unfortunately I do have to buy a new part. I've tried to fix that, clean it up, but it appears that, just grab a pen, this part here is it's all been worn out. There's no more copper there, so it's just, I think it's actually plastic down there, and this is overheated and looks like it's shorted out around there. This didn't clean up too bad. I mean, this part here, but this is okay. We got a date stamp of the 14th of July, 14th of the 7th, 2018. So we're now halfway through the year 2018. I'll update this video now. I came out to have a second go at working on the Chevy. I find that because of the location I live in, I can't get mobile mechanics to come out here, and to have the car fixed, it's got to be towed into a into a auto electrical shop, and that's money I don't want to spend. I'd rather sell it at this point. Most mobile auto electrical guys, they'll tell me, look, I've got to charge you 2 hours before I even get there. And they're really not interested because of the distance they've got to travel and the time they've got to travel. So the purpose now of this video now is just to update exactly what's gone on and what I've found. The first thing I found is when I tried to charge up the battery, it wouldn't take a charge, and it's faulty. All the other batteries would take a charge with this charger. However, this big battery, which is now surprisingly, it's actually a 1.5 years old. It wouldn't take a charge. The date you see written on the battery is the date that I purchased and installed it. So I've got the old original battery that will take a charge, and that's charging. So that's all healthy and good. The only thing is it's a bit small and a bit old and weak to crank the motor over at a pace that will actually start it. However, even with this small battery, it did keep on cranking, and I've got the new neutral safety switch, and that made no difference. Okay, so there's a new one on the right. That's in the same position. So what I did was I connected this up, and the motor just kept on cranking. It really made no difference, so that was a bit disappointing. Yeah, so that's how it was hooked up when I did the test, and it was just like the other one. This was removed when I purchased the car. However, that does hook up on this side here, and that groove that faced in. So, and as I said, it would crank over, but it wouldn't stop. So, yeah, I'm in the same position. And then this morning, I was looking on Google, and 6 months ago, which was when the last time I filmed this, fixing this problem, there were no videos on Google. And this morning I had another look, and I found 2 videos, and a guy was saying that he replaced the positive and negative cables, and he also replaced the solenoid, which was a separate solenoid, but that fixed the problem. And so, looking at this, you know, you can't really see any wires on that side, but this side looks a bit old, but it doesn't look too bad. But when I removed the positive cable running down to the starter motor, this is what I found. So you've got the original 1977 cable here, and that connects to the starter motor. But when you come around, and this is a fairly familiar looking design on this car, it's got an extension built onto the end of the positive cable, and it joins just there. This moves, just a bit of a protective cover, but let's say we expose this join here and get a look, see what could be possibly going on there. Okay, well, this all seems fairly good, but the way they've joined it, they've got this, I don't know whether they've heated it up or sort of used a big crimping machine to join it all. I'm not sure what type of metal that is. There is some corrosion. Just focus that. Just there. Another thing about this wire is this is fairly flexible and good, but it's when you get down toward the starter that it becomes almost, I can barely move that at all. Oh, okay, that's probably the plastic. I don't know whether you can read that there or not, but that says copper clad aluminium. I don't know whether they're talking about that it eventually runs into this aluminium joiner here onto the starter motor or not. But a few things I see is this is burnt through at some stage. There's a bit of a possibly a problem there, and there does seem to be, it's either solder. There could be a bit of white rust just there. Okay, for a while with my videos I've been talking about wires and car body negative systems, the negative cable. How could it be possible, and it seems possible, that over time blocks can develop in the system. And there you go, that's the wire exposed. That's the part that joins onto the starter motor. And as we come along, this all looks good, but just here, it's just terrible, and it seems as if some sort of resistance has built up in this area here, be it from corrosion or just years of high current running through. We can see there that the wires become like burnt out. Okay, well, I'll go to the shop now. I'll get a negative cable. That should be fairly easy to find, and I might have to make a join, but I'll be able to get that the other one set up. It's just the part that connects to the starter motor, that join there, that could be fairly hard to find, but anyway, I'll see what I can do. Okay, so this is what I'm using to install as the power side lead. That's the make. I got it in super cheap store. Okay. I'm going to put shrink wrap, 3 layers of shrink wrap plus the original cover. It connects straight to the battery, and it seems very good quality. That will connect to the starter motor. It'll come down and do a sharp loop around, but I think that should be good. So the way I see it, this is just about the pivoting turning point for me. If this works and it fixes the problem, this will probably become my my hobby and spare car. If not, I'd say, because of the time and expense that it's taking, I'd say if this doesn't sell it, I beg your pardon, if this doesn't fix it, I'll sell. I'm trying to build a new career, and the motorbikes and this hobby car has gone right from when I was still continuing to do up the house, to after doing the house, working on my career, and it's just so time consuming and expensive. So if this fixes it, I'll keep it. If not, I've got no choice but to sell it, because I can't even get a mobile mechanic to come out here and work on it. Okay, so the positive cable is connected to the starter with the original ground, and unfortunately, as I'll demonstrate, that hasn't fixed it. Okay, I'll go and turn the key. Okay, well, I've done some research, and this circuit breaker here, it could be part of the starting system, and so I'll look into that now. That's got the red wire running to it, and that's from the starter, so that's all good. But it's this circuit breaker here. So I'll do some tests, and I'll let you know what I found. Okay, well, surprisingly enough, I disconnected the two wires going to that switch, and made no difference. The motor kept on cranking. Also, with the wires connected, you may be able to see down there, the wires connected. It also keeps on cranking. Okay, well, I'll just update this video. What I did was connect it all up, and I ran a wire from the battery to the trigger terminal on the solenoid on the starter. And what happened there was it just kept on cranking over. So I did another test, and that was to wire this up. This is a push button starter. Wire this up to the starter motor trigger wire, and push the button, and it still kept on cranking. That's like an open switch. At this point, the unusual thing about it is there's no connecting there, no sound or spark, with this detached from the wire on the starter motor. These tests were done with the key in the off position. That's the on, and that's the off position. With these tests, I'm getting the feeling that 12 volts is being supplied to the starter motor solenoid, instead of maybe less volts are required, and that could be the actual problem. So yeah, the brown wire there is the wire that triggers the solenoid that drives the starter motor. The first test was hooking this wire up to the battery with 12 volts, hooking it up to the trigger wire, and it kept cranking even when I released or disconnected the connection. Then I connected this up to the push button start, and it still kept on cranking. Possibly getting a new starter or an aftermarket starter that can handle more amps may fix the problem, but I've actually spent a a little too much time and money on this vehicle. The most amazing thing about this starter motor problem is the fact that it works perfectly when it's off the engine. Okay, on further investigation, what I've found out is that this is not the ignition switch. This part here, that's the tumbler, and the ignition switch is actually down here, up around on top of the column there, and that's the actual switch. And all this does is control a rod that goes down to the ignition switch. When I turn this the tumbler, it does spring back, so it does seem to be nearly working, the ignition switch. Okay, this is a Ford starter solenoid, and we're going to rig this up and see if we can get rid of that constant cranking problem. Okay, so that's it. Okay, so for homework, there's this video here. And this is also a good video to watch. Okay, so what we're virtually, in summary, what we're going to do is we're going to put the trigger wire here. And when I say the trigger wire, I mean the wire that runs to the starter solenoid that powers from your switch, that powers the connection and makes your starter work. So that's going to go to this terminal. I'm not going to use that terminal there. The main cable going to the starter from the battery and any other wires we're going to connect here, and the battery's here, and we're going to run a lead from the battery to here. So I think it's the alternator wire and the main cable from the battery. On this side I'm going to run the cable to the starter and a separate wire to the starter trigger wire here that comes from your ignition switch to make the starter go. So in summary, this wire here will come up and go here, and there'll be a wire running from the battery to here. This wire here will go to the S terminal here. This wire is the main battery cable wire. So there'll be a main battery cable wire here to the starter, and there will also be a cable running from here to the same place on the starter. Okay, well, congratulations for sticking it out and viewing until this part of the video. I believe I've found the problem. This is the first time I've ever done anything and has made any difference to the starter. I can crank it over, only just, but I can crank it over and it will stop cranking. It's wired up exactly how I said it'd be wired up at the start of today's video. It wouldn't crank over at all until I put the ground cable. This is grounded on the solenoid. I did have it here on the frame, but when I connected it up to the battery itself, it fixed the problem. It did start cranking over at that time, and as we'll see, it will stop cranking. So I'll test that now. Okay, so at the moment we've got an elaborate array of electrical joins. However, basically the ground is the same ground that was there before, so that's grounded here to the frame holding the alternator. The other ground is the ground to the battery and to the solenoid. The alternator wire, the red one, bypasses the starter motor completely, and it goes down, and it's connecting at the moment to the solenoid, so the battery side of the solenoid. So that's the connection there from the alternator. So there's the positive terminal, there's the cable, and it's connecting with the cable at the battery side of the solenoid. So this side here flows to the starter, and this is the battery cable from the battery. So now we'll look at the switch or solenoid join that's here on the S terminal of the Ford remote starter, remote solenoid switch. So we're looking at the green, try and angle that right up under there. The green and yellow join to the switch runs down, and it joins here, and it goes up into the cab, and that connects to the tumbler where the key goes in. Then of course now we know the tumbler, where you turn the key, runs down to the ignition switch, which is located on top of the steering column, but still just up under the dash. And then that connects to the neutral safety switch. That comes down, that all comes down, and now it's connecting there, and it's going up to the Ford remote solenoid starter switch, and that's connecting to the small S terminal on that solenoid. So that solenoid switch there. Okay, now we'll look at the power supply to the starter. So we've got the cable going down to the main fixing point on the starter. Okay, and that's the blue cable there, and that's fixing to the starter motor solenoid on the big fixing point, or the big mounting point, or the biggest bolt and nut area. And we've also got, at the same time as we go to the starter, we go to the starter S or switch. Okay, so that's probably better seen at this angle. So we're doing two things at the power supply side of the Ford remote starter switch. We're also coming off there, going down, and you can see the red cable there. It goes to the brown cable, and that is going to the starter solenoid S switch location. So this is how it was originally wired up. So you've got the battery cable fixing to the big nut, big mounting point, and also the alternator wire fixing to the same mounting point. And this was the switch. The switch used to go to the solenoid, to the small mounting point there. Okay, this is the S terminal. When you turn the key, it goes through the ignition switch and neutral safety switch, and it supplies power to this point here, and we'll see that's the switch to make the actual motor run. Okay, the battery's a bit flat, but we'll turn it over and it works well. Okay, success. Okay, so we're going to call that a success. This bigger battery that I use on my other car, when I connected that, yeah, it was good to go. These test wires, the wire really wasn't strong enough to hold the current, and one of them actually burnt out. So when I connected them or replaced them with the good gauge wire, yeah, it fires up real good. Hey, let's wrap this video up. This is a big success. So I'll just show the work, and then I'll explain the work, and we can close it up. Okay, so I'll explain every lead, and I'll get under the car and show also where the lead goes to the starter. So we'll do the ground wiring. We've got the solenoid. It's grounded to the battery with this black cable. It's fairly strong, thick gauge. Also, the ground goes to the alternator. The two wires on the firewall there, that's the main power supply to the cab, and it comes around and goes straight to the battery side of the remote starter solenoid. And then we've got the battery cable going to the starter solenoid. The other wire is where you turn the key, and that goes to the switch side of the solenoid. The switch connects this side to the other side, and we've got two wires. One is going to the starter solenoid off-on switch down at the starter motor, and this is the power supply to the starter motor. Okay, the red lead is the switch on the solenoid, and the blue lead is the power supply that's put through once the switch activates, is put through to the starter motor. Okay, the 27th of July, 27th of the 7th, 2018. So we see that the constant or run-on starter motor problem's fixed. So I'll just go and turn the key. So I've been starting it up the last couple of days, and she's been, 100%. So that is a fix.